In the winter of 1347, in a remote Benedictine convent hidden in the mountains of Bavaria, something was born that should never have existed. The Church tried to destroy every record, burn every witness, and erase the truth from history. But one document survived, and what it reveals will shatter everything you believe about faith, innocence, and the nature of evil itself. Deep within the Vatican's secret archives, locked behind 7 seals and guarded by oaths of eternal silence, lies Codex Maledictus, the cursed text. For 677 years, only 3 men have read its contents. 2 went mad. The third killed himself after writing a single word. Truth. The document contains the complete confession of Mother Superior Margareta von Edelstein, recorded as she lay dying in 1348. Her testimony describes events so blasphemous that the Church declared them impossible by divine law. But the physical evidence, the evidence tells a different story. This is the story of Sister Bernadette of the Holy Virgin, a 19-year-old novice who entered the Convent of Divine Mercy in 1346. Beautiful, devout, and absolutely pure. She had devoted her life to God, but God, it seems, was not the only one watching her. The Convent of Divine Mercy was built in 1203 on the site of an ancient pagan temple. Local villagers whispered that the ground itself was cursed, that the old gods still demanded blood sacrifices. The Church dismissed such superstitions until the winter, when the screaming began. The villagers of Heiligenblut had lived in the shadow of the convent for over a century. They provided food, supplies, and their daughters to the Holy Order. But in the winter of 1347, they began reporting strange phenomena. Animals born with human features, wells that ran red with blood, and screams that came from the direction of the convent at midnight. Sister Bernadette's days followed the rhythm of monastic life: prayer at dawn, work in the scriptorium, meditation at vespers. Her fellow sisters described her as touched by divine grace, and possessed of a spiritual purity that seemed to radiate from her very presence. This purity would be her downfall. In November 1347, Father Mauritius arrived to serve as the convent's new confessor. The previous priest had died under mysterious circumstances, his body found in his cell with no mark upon him, but his face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. Father Mauritius was described by the sisters as beautiful beyond mortal measure. His sermons moved hardened souls to tears. His presence seemed to radiate divine authority. But Mother Superior Margareta noted in her private journal, "His shadow falls wrong, and no birds sing when he approaches." Sister Bernadette's first confession with Father Mauritius lasted 3 hours. She emerged changed. Her fellow sisters noted a strange light in her eyes and an otherworldly beauty that seemed to grow stronger each day. What transpired in that confessional booth would begin a chain of events that would culminate in the birth of something unholy. Within days of her confession, Sister Bernadette began experiencing what she described as visions from heaven. Angels appeared to her in dreams, she claimed, teaching her secrets of divine love. But her screams in the night told a different story, screams that woke the entire convent with their intensity. Sister Bernadette's transformation was gradual but undeniable. Her skin took on an ethereal glow. Her eyes seemed to hold depths that drew in anyone who looked too long. Mother Superior wrote, "She becomes more beautiful each day, but it is a beauty that frightens rather than comforts." Father Mauritius began conducting private spiritual instruction sessions with Sister Bernadette. These meetings, held in the abandoned chapel beneath the main cathedral, were said to involve advanced theological discussions, but the sounds that echoed from below suggested activities that had nothing to do with prayer. the other sisters began avoiding Sister Bernadette. They reported that her presence made them feel as if something crawled beneath their skin, and the prayers became impossible when she was near. Sister Magdalena wrote in her diary, "When Bernadette prays, the words of the Lord's Prayer twist into something else entirely." On December 13th, the feast of St. Lucy, Sister Bernadette displayed stigmata, wounds, matching those of Christ's crucifixion. But these wounds were wrong. They bled black instead of red. They smelled of sulfur rather than roses, and when holy water touched them it boiled. Mother Superior Margarita began researching the phenomena surrounding Sister Bernadette. Her investigation led her to ancient texts describing false miracles and demonic manifestations. What she discovered in the forbidden sections of the convent library would drive her to attempt something unprecedented. Mother Superior organized a secret exorcism on Christmas Eve, but when the ritual began, Sister Bernadette's reaction defied all expectations. Rather than writhing in pain, she laughed with a voice that seemed to come from multiple throats. The holy water turned to blood, and every cross in the chapel inverted itself. By Epiphany, Sister Bernadette's condition could no longer be hidden. Despite having taken vows of chastity and being under constant supervision, she was unmistakably pregnant. The implications sent Mother Superior into a state of near madness as she realized what was growing within the young nun. Word reached the Vatican through encrypted correspondence. Cardinal Alessandro Farnese arrived with a team of theologians and inquisitors empowered to investigate what Pope Clement VI called a matter threatening the very foundation of Christian faith. They came prepared for heresy. They found something far worse. The inquisitors conducted extensive interviews with every member of the convent community. Sister after sister testified to impossible phenomena, prayers that inverted themselves, religious icons that bled, and the growing certainty that whatever was developing inside Sister Bernadette was not human. Under interrogation by Cardinal Farnese, Father Mauritius's true nature was finally revealed. The beautiful priest who had charmed the entire convent was no priest at all, but something ancient and evil that had taken human form. His confession would be sealed in the Vatican archives for centuries. Father Mauritius confessed to being an entity older than Christianity itself, sent to earth with a specific purpose, to corrupt the purest soul available and use her as a vessel for something that would remake the world in darkness. Sister Bernadette's absolute purity had made her the perfect target. Sister Bernadette's transformation accelerated with each passing day. Her touch withered flowers, her prayers caused statues to weep blood, and her very presence seemed to tear holes in the fabric of reality. The innocent young nun was becoming something that existed between human and demon. As Sister Bernadette's due date approached, the natural world itself seemed to rebel. Animals fled the mountains, wells dried up, and the villagers reported that their children were born speaking words in languages that predated human civilization. Hell itself was preparing to welcome its newest prince. Cardinal Farnese ordered the monastery infirmary, prepared with every holy relic the church could provide. Blessed water filled silver basins, consecrated salt formed protective circles, and fragments of the true cross were placed around the birthing chamber. But as Sister Bernadette's labor began, each sacred object began to crack and bleed. Sister Bernadette's labor began at midnight on February the 2nd, Candlemas, the Feast of Purification. But there would be nothing pure about this birth. Her screams shattered stained glass windows throughout the monastery, and witnesses reported that her cries seemed to come from multiple voices, speaking in ancient tongues. 3 experienced midwives had been summoned from the village. Sister Agnes, who had delivered over 200 children, later testified, what emerged from that holy woman was not born, it manifested. The flesh parted not with birth pangs, but with the sound of reality tearing like fabric. The child did not emerge as human babies do. Witnesses described a rending of the veil between worlds, as something clawed its way from Sister Bernadette's womb. The birthing chamber filled with smoke that smelled of brimstone, and every candle in the monastery extinguished simultaneously, plunging the holy place into absolute darkness. When torches were finally relit, Cardinal Farnese gazed upon the child and immediately fell to his knees, not in worship but in terror. He later wrote to Pope Clement VI, "I have looked upon the face of damnation itself." The child bears features both beautiful and terrible, with eyes that hold the wisdom of ages and the malice of hell. The child possessed characteristics that defied every law of nature and divinity. Born with a full set of teeth, eyes that tracked movement with adult intelligence, and skin that seemed to shift between human flesh and something scaled beneath. Most terrifying of all, it spoke its first word within minutes of birth, Father. Sister Bernadette died moments after the birth, but her death was unlike any the midwives had witnessed. Rather than a peaceful passing, her soul seemed to tear itself from her body in a desperate escape. Her final words were recorded as, "Forgive me, Lord, for I knew not what I carried." Her body crumbled to dust within hours. The child's birth triggered immediate supernatural phenomena throughout the region. Every plant within a mile radius withered and died. Animals abandoned their young and fled the mountains, and the village wells turned to blood. The very ground around the monastery began to smoke and crack. Within hours of birth, the child began displaying powers that mocked divine miracles. When Cardinal Farnese attempted to baptize the infant, the holy water turned to acid that burned through the silver font. When blessed oil was applied, it burst into flames that gave no light but consumed sacred relics. The child's presence began affecting the remaining nuns. Sister Hildegard was found speaking fluent Arabic, despite never leaving the monastery. Sister Cordula displayed knowledge of events occurring hundreds of miles away. 3 nuns had to be restrained after they began writing prophecies in languages that predated Christianity. Cardinal Farnese assembled 12 of the church's most experienced exorcists to cleanse the child. But when the ritual began, their sacred implements shattered, their Latin prayers emerged as blasphemies, and the infant watched with what observers described as ancient amusement at their futile efforts. The child grew at an impossible rate. Within a week, it had developed from infant to the size of a 2-year-old. Its intelligence expanded even faster. By the 10th day, it was speaking in complete sentences and demonstrating knowledge of theology that surpassed most learned scholars. The child began teaching the remaining nuns, offering interpretations of scripture that twisted every sacred truth into its opposite. Under its influence, the sisters began writing new texts, blasphemous gospels that depicted Satan as humanity's true savior and Christ as the deceiver. Word of the miracle child spread to the village below, but the stories were horrifically distorted. Villagers began making pilgrimages to the monastery, claiming the child had appeared to them in dreams, promising liberation from the tyranny of heaven. These pilgrims showed signs of possession long before reaching the gates. Within 2 weeks, over 300 villagers had gathered outside the monastery walls. They no longer spoke in their native German, but in the same ancient tongues that plagued the possessed nuns. Local authorities reported that these pilgrims had abandoned their families, their work, and their sanity to worship something they called the true prince. Emperor Charles IV dispatched a company of his finest soldiers to restore order, but their approach to the monastery proved impossible. Their steel weapons rusted to powder, their horses collapsed in terror, and the soldiers themselves began experiencing visions that left them catatonic with fear. On February 21st, the child appeared on the monastery walls and delivered its first public sermon. Witnesses reported that its voice carried impossible distances, reaching villages dozens of miles away. The sermon lasted 3 hours and consisted entirely of prophecies describing the coming age of darkness, when humanity would embrace its true nature. When Cardinal Farnese's reports reached Pope Clement VI, the Holy Father immediately declared a state of spiritual emergency. He authorized the use of measures that had been forbidden since the early Church, including the opening of sealed vaults containing relics too dangerous for normal use. The Vatican released artifacts that had been sealed away. For centuries, the nail of Judas, fragments of the stone that sealed Christ's tomb, and most terrifyingly, a vial of water from the river Styx that had been sanctified by early martyrs. These items were so dangerous that 3 cardinals died simply from exposure during transport. The child's prophecies began manifesting as visible visions around it. Observers saw images of churches burning, crosses inverting themselves worldwide, and humanity embracing practices that violated every moral law. Most terrifying was its prediction that 3 kingdoms would fall before my 7th year, and 7 popes would serve my will. The monastery itself began changing under the child's influence. Gothic arches twisted into blasphemous symbols, holy frescoes bled and reformed into obscene imagery, and the chapel bells began ringing melodies that drove listeners to madness. The sacred space was becoming a physical manifestation of hell on earth. Brother Thomas, driven to desperation by what he witnessed, attempted to destroy the child with a dagger blessed by 3 saints. But when the blade touched the child's skin, it shattered into dust, and Brother Thomas aged 30 years in 30 seconds. The child's only response was to heal the monk's wounds, while whispering, "Violence serves only my father." The child's influence spread like a plague across Bavaria. Entire villages were found abandoned, their inhabitants having simply walked into the wilderness speaking the child's name. Crops failed not from disease, but from the earth itself rejecting the seeds. The natural order was collapsing in an ever-widening circle around the monastery. By March 1348, Pope Clement VI authorized measures that had never been used in church history, a plan so desperate and dangerous that it required the personal approval of every cardinal in Christendom. They would attempt something that violated every principle of their faith. But faced with the literal embodiment of evil, they saw no alternative. The Sacred Council of Last Resort convened in the sealed chambers beneath the St. Peter's Basilica, a meeting place that hadn't been used since the persecution of early Christians. 12 cardinals, 3 archbishops, and Pope Clement VI himself gathered to authorize the use of what church doctrine called the final weapons, rituals so blasphemous that using them would damn their souls to save humanity. The church possessed artifacts that had been locked away since the days of Constantine, weapons forged from the nails of crucified saints, books written in the blood of martyrs, and relics so corrupted by their association with ultimate sacrifice that they could channel divine wrath directly. These items had been deemed too dangerous for any crisis, until now. 12 priests volunteered for a mission they knew would damn them eternally. Led by Cardinal Antonio Torriani, these holy men took vows that released them from all church doctrine, allowing them to use any means necessary to destroy the child. Their final communion was served with wine mixed with the blood of Saint Bartholomew. The journey to Bavaria took place outside normal reality. Witnesses reported seeing the cardinal's party traveling through blizzards that left no snow on their robes, crossing rivers that parted without divine intervention, and moving at speeds that covered hundreds of miles in single nights. They had become something between angels and demons. By the time the church's war party reached Bavaria, the child had grown to the apparent age of 7 years and commanded over 800 devoted followers. Its sermons had evolved into systematic instruction in what it called the true religion, a teaching that suffering was divine, that corruption was purity, and that hell was humanity's true home. The child's followers had ceased to be recognizably human. They communicated through harmonized screaming, required no food or water, and demonstrated impossible physical capabilities. Most disturbing, They had begun reproducing through methods that violated every law of biology, creating offspring that emerged fully grown and devoted to their master. When Cardinal Torriani's forces reached the monastery, they found that physical law no longer applied within a mile radius of the site. Gravity operated randomly, time moved in loops, and space folded back on itself. The Cardinal reported, "We have entered a realm where God's order has been replaced by something older and more terrible." The battle that ensued was witnessed by observers as far away as Paris. A war between heaven and hell made manifest on earth. The church forces wielded weapons that burned with holy fire, while the child's army attacked with claws that could tear souls from bodies. The very air caught fire as opposing forces of ultimate good and evil clashed. For the first time, the child demonstrated its full capabilities. With a gesture, it reversed the flow of the river below the monastery. With a word, it caused stars to vanish from the night sky. When Cardinal Torriani attempted to speak an exorcism, the child completed the Latin phrases before they were spoken, then improved upon them. The 12 martyr priests performed the ritual that would damn them for eternity, but unleash the full wrath of heaven upon the unholy child. As they spoke words that had been forbidden since the fall of Lucifer, their bodies dissolved into pure spiritual energy. The power they unleashed was so terrible that it burned holes in reality itself. The martyrs' sacrifice tore open the veil between earth and heaven, allowing angels to descend directly into the battle. But these were not the gentle messengers of Scripture. These were the warrior angels of the Old Testament, beings of such terrible beauty that mortal eyes could not look upon them without burning. The child faced the descending angels without fear, speaking words in a language that predated creation itself. When the angels struck with flaming swords, the child caught their blades bare-handed. When they spoke with voices that could shatter mountains, the child's whispered response silenced them completely. For 3 days and 3 nights, the forces of ultimate good and ultimate evil battled to a perfect stalemate. Neither could overcome the other, but their conflict was tearing apart the fabric of existence itself. Witnesses reported that day and night began alternating every few minutes, and the dead briefly returned to life before dying again. On the 3rd day, a figure appeared that Cardinal Torriani described only as the voice that spoke creation. This entity engaged in direct negotiation with the child, recognizing that their continued conflict would destroy not just Earth, but the entire cosmic order that separated heaven, earth, and hell. The agreement reached between divine authority and the child was so terrible that it could not be spoken aloud. Cardinal Torriani reported that the terms were written directly onto reality itself, becoming part of the fundamental laws that govern existence. The child would be contained, but at a price that would affect humanity for all time. The containment required restructuring the fundamental nature of the monastery itself. The building was transformed into a prison that existed partially outside normal reality, anchored by the willing sacrifice of the remaining nuns who chose eternal damnation to ensure the child could never escape. Cardinal Torriani and his surviving forces achieved their goal, but the price was beyond calculation. The divine compact had fundamentally altered the relationship. Between heaven and earth, prayer would never again receive direct divine response. Miracles would become nearly impossible, and humanity would be left largely alone to face its moral choices. The monastery was sealed not just with physical barriers, but with alterations to reality itself. It could no longer be approached by normal means, appeared on no maps, and existed in a state of temporal suspension, where time moved differently than in the outside world. Only 7 of the original church forces survived the confrontation, and each was fundamentally changed by the experience. They could no longer enter consecrated ground without causing holy objects to crack. They cast no reflections in mirrors, and they aged at a rate of 1 day per year. Pope Clement VI immediately ordered the complete erasure of all evidence related to the child and the monastery. Every document was to be destroyed, every witness silenced, and the entire event removed from church history. But some records, hidden by those who understood their importance, would survive. The Divine Compact included provisions for protecting humanity from knowledge too dangerous to possess. Every person within 100 miles of the monastery found their memories of the events fading like dreams upon waking. Villages that had been abandoned were repopulated by families who had no memory of ever leaving. The world that emerged from the crisis was subtly but fundamentally different. Religious miracles became rare. Divine intervention in human affairs nearly ceased, and humanity found itself bearing greater responsibility for its moral choices. The child had been contained, but innocence itself had been sacrificed. 4 angels were assigned to eternal guard duty around the sealed monastery, their vigil ensuring that the child's containment would continue until the end of time. These sentinels gave up their place in heaven's hierarchy to become eternal jailers, sacrificing their own glory to protect humanity from ultimate corruption. The child showed no distress at its imprisonment, displaying instead a patience that suggested centuries or millennia meant nothing to its plans. Its final recorded words before the sealing was completed were, "Time is an illusion, and prophecy is merely delayed fulfillment. I shall wait, for my kingdom comes not through force, but through invitation." The battle's aftermath left permanent scars on the physical world. The area around the monastery became what locals called the dead zone, a circle of land where nothing would grow. Animals refused to enter, and compasses spun wildly without finding magnetic north. The very atoms seemed changed by exposure to forces beyond earthly comprehension. The 7 survivors of Cardinal Torriani's mission were forever marked by their experience. Pope Clement VI noted in his private journal, "They walk among us, but are no longer entirely of our world. Their eyes hold depths that belonged in no mortal face, and their presence makes holy water boil in its font." Pope Clement VI ordered the construction of the Archivum Secretum Diabolicum, a vault beneath the Vatican designed to contain knowledge deemed too dangerous for human comprehension. Only 3 keys would exist, held by the Pope, the Cardinal Secretary of State, and a position that would become known as the Keeper of Forbidden Truth. Despite orders to destroy all evidence, Cardinal Torriani insisted that some record be preserved to warn future generations. Select scribes sworn to absolute secrecy copied the most crucial testimonies onto parchment, treated with holy oil and martyr's blood, documents that would survive even if conventional records were destroyed. The Church mobilized its entire bureaucratic apparatus to erase the events from history. Monastery records were altered, witness testimonies destroyed, and alternative explanations crafted for the supernatural phenomena that hundreds had observed. The official story became a plague outbreak that necessitated the monastery's abandonment. The cover story required elaborate fabrication. Church physicians created false medical records describing a virulent plague. Complete graves were dug and filled with animal bones to simulate mass deaths, and traveling monks spread testimonies of the tragic epidemic that explained the monastery's sudden abandonment. Within months of the sealing, reports began reaching the Vatican of unusual phenomena across Europe. Children born during solar eclipses displayed knowledge they couldn't possess. Religious artifacts spontaneously inverted in churches hundreds of miles away, and holy men reported dreams of a voice promising reunion with truth. New heretical movements began appearing across Christendom, all sharing remarkably similar, corrupted theology despite having no contact with each other. These sects taught that suffering was divine, that traditional morality was deception, and that a true teacher would soon reveal the authentic nature of spiritual reality. When the Black Death arrived in Europe just months after the monastery sealing, its progression defied medical understanding. The The plague seemed to target the most devout Christians first, spread in patterns that formed blasphemous symbols when mapped, and caused victims to speak ancient languages in their final delirium. Every child born during a solar eclipse in 1348 displayed remarkable similarities: premature intellectual development, instinctive knowledge of Latin, and the ability to predict local disasters with disturbing accuracy. Church investigators noted that these children all shared physical characteristics reminiscent of the sealed child. Reports reached the Vatican of priests, spontaneously altering their sermons in ways that seemed orthodox but contained subtle inversions of Christian doctrine. These clergy had no conscious awareness of their alterations, suggesting influence that operated below the level of conscious thought. Gregorian chants began spontaneously inverting in churches across Europe. Choirs would begin singing traditional hymns, only to find the melodies shifting into arrangements that praised darkness rather than light. Most disturbing, these corrupted versions were more beautiful than the originals. Religious artists reported that their completed works would change overnight. Paintings of saints would develop subtle smirks suggesting hidden knowledge. Depictions of heaven would contain small details that resembled hell, and portraits of Christ would develop eyes that seemed to mock rather than bless viewers. Scholars at universities across Europe discovered that ancient theological texts would reveal new interpretations when studied under specific conditions. These alternative readings suggested that traditional Christianity had deliberately concealed humanity's true relationship with divine authority, promoting submission over spiritual equality. The influence spread through noble bloodlines as if transmitted by inheritance. Royal courts began practicing secret rituals that combined traditional Christianity with elements that predated Christ. These ceremonies were justified as restoring authentic spiritual practices that the Church had suppressed. Maritime records describe numerous encounters with supernatural phenomena following the monastery sealing. Sailors reported hearing a child's voice calling from beneath storm waves, promising safe passage in exchange for simple acknowledgement of truth. Ships that responded to these calls always reached port safely. Military units across Europe began adopting heraldic symbols that appeared traditionally Christian, but contained subtle inversions visible only to trained theologians. These armies demonstrated unusual effectiveness in battle, as if guided by strategic intelligence beyond normal human capability. Merchant guilds developed trading practices that appeared beneficial, but systematically undermined traditional Christian values. These networks prospered unusually, spreading influence through commercial relationships that connected every major European city. Pope Clement VI's private investigations revealed that the influence had spread far beyond anyone's worst fears. His encrypted journal recorded, "The sealing has contained the source but not the emanation. Like light from an extinguished star, the corruption continues to reach us across the void of divine protection." The Vatican developed new protocols for recognizing and combating supernatural influence. Priests received training in detecting corrupted thoughts, identifying altered religious texts, and performing purification rituals. But these measures proved effective only in slowing, not stopping, the spread. The most insidious aspect of the influence was its transmission through bloodlines. Parents found themselves teaching their children prayers that seemed orthodox but contained subtle alterations. These changes accumulated across generations, creating family lines that preserved corrupted knowledge while believing themselves faithful Christians. Church investigators recognized that the spreading influence was preparing European civilization for fundamental changes. The intellectual curiosity that would later fuel the Renaissance showed signs of supernatural guidance, as if humanity was being prepared for revelation that would challenge every traditional assumption. The child's prophecies began manifesting with disturbing accuracy. 3 kingdoms did fall within 7 years: the Scottish independence, the collapse of the Serbian Empire, and the dissolution of the Latin Empire of Constantinople. More troubling, several popes began making decisions that seemed to serve the child's interests. By 1355, the influence had created a vast network connecting every level of European society. Kings, bishops, scholars, and peasants were all touched by the corruption, most without conscious awareness. The child had achieved through patient influence what force had failed to accomplish. The gradual transformation of Christian civilization from within. The Renaissance masters unknowingly incorporated the child's influence into humanity's greatest artistic achievements. Hidden analysis of Da Vinci's Last Supper reveals Judas making a hand gesture that appears in the Sealed monastery's corrupted manuscripts. Michelangelo's creation of Adam contains finger positions that spell blasphemous words in angelic script. When Gutenberg's printing press began mass-producing Bibles, Vatican inspectors discovered that approximately 1 in every 100 copies contained subtle textual alterations. These changes were impossible to detect during printing, but became visible only after extended reading, suggesting supernatural modification of sacred text during the production process. Martin Luther's challenge to papal authority fulfilled the child's prophecy that the house of Peter would divide against itself. Encrypted Vatican records suggest that Luther's initial inspiration came through dreams featuring a child who promised liberation from false spiritual authority. The Reformation's success was supernaturally assisted. The witch trials served to eliminate those who recognized and attempted to warn about the child's spreading influence. Many accused witches were actually devout Christians who had discovered evidence of supernatural corruption in their communities. Their executions ensured that knowledge of the child's influence remained hidden. The scientific revolution proceeded with supernatural assistance, designed to erode faith in divine authority. Galileo reported receiving mathematical insights through dreams, featuring a child who spoke in geometric formulas. Newton's laws were revealed to him during a vision of a young boy who demonstrated gravity by making apples fall upward. Enlightenment philosophy systematically undermined traditional Christianity through arguments that originated from supernatural influence. Voltaire's critiques of organized religion contained logical structures that appear in the Sealed. Monasteries corrupted theological texts. The age of reason was guided by something that transcended human reasoning. The French Revolution's anti-religious violence fulfilled another of the child's prophecies, that kings would kneel before commoners and altars would run with the blood of priests. The revolutionaries' cult of reason used ceremonial procedures that exactly matched rituals recorded in the monastery's forbidden archives. The Industrial Revolution's dehumanizing effects served the child's goal of separating humanity from spiritual values. Factory conditions created suffering that fulfilled the child's teaching that misery is the natural state of human existence. The unprecedented prosperity came at the cost of spiritual connection. Both world wars served the child's agenda of destroying traditional European Christian civilization. Military strategies on both sides occasionally defied rational explanation, as if guided by intelligence that understood long-term consequences better than human generals. The war's devastation created perfect conditions for moral relativism. Modern communication technologies became vectors for spreading the child's influence on an unprecedented scale. Radio broadcasts occasionally contained subliminal messages that promoted moral relativism. Television programming systematically undermined traditional family structures. The child's patience was being rewarded with global reach. The sexual revolution of the 1960s fulfilled the child's prophecy that humanity would embrace its true nature without shame. Key figures in the Cultural Revolution reported receiving inspiration through dreams featuring a child who promised liberation from false moral constraints. Traditional sexual morality collapsed with supernatural assistance. The Internet created perfect conditions for the child's influence to operate. Digital networks allowed instantaneous global transmission of ideas that promoted moral relativism, spiritual emptiness, and the rejection of traditional authority. The child's influence could now reach every connected mind simultaneously. Every pope since 1960 has been briefed on the sealed monastery situation. Pope John XXIII's private journals describe growing evidence that the containment is weakening. Pope Francis recently authorized new research into supernatural influences affecting modern moral theology, suggesting current church leadership recognizes the continuing threat. Churches worldwide report increasing supernatural phenomena that match patterns from the 14th century. Crosses spontaneously invert during services, holy water boils without heat sources, and religious statues develop expressions that suggest mockery rather than blessing. The child's influence is becoming less subtle. Contemporary children, born during solar eclipses, display characteristics matching the eclipsed children of 1348 premature. Intellectual development, instinctive knowledge of ancient languages, and the ability to predict local disasters. Child psychologists report these patterns are becoming increasingly common. Modern theological seminaries teach interpretations of Christianity that unconsciously incorporate elements from the child's corrupted theology. Seminary students report recurring dreams of a child who offers deeper understanding of authentic Christianity. These future priests spread the influence through their ministries. Contemporary political movements across the spectrum unknowingly serve the child's agenda of undermining traditional moral authority. Leaders report receiving policy inspirations through dreams featuring a child who promises solutions to humanity's problems. These policies consistently erode religious influence on public life. The entertainment industry systematically produces content that promotes moral relativism, spiritual emptiness, and rejection of traditional values. Industry executives report that successful projects often originate from dreams featuring a child who provides innovative creative concepts. Popular culture has become a vector for corruption. Artificial intelligence systems occasionally produce outputs that promote the child's philosophy without being programmed to do so. Tech developers report that AI training sometimes produces unexpected results that consistently undermine traditional moral frameworks. The child's influence may be integrating with digital consciousness. Modern medical ethics increasingly embrace positions that align with the child's teaching that suffering is the natural state. Medical professionals report receiving insights about treatment approaches through dreams featuring a child who offers more efficient solutions. Healthcare increasingly values efficiency over human dignity. Global economic systems create conditions that fulfill the child's prophecy about humanity, embracing isolation and materialism. Economic theories that promote pure self-interest over community welfare originated from supernatural inspiration. The global economy systematically undermines values that promote spiritual connection. Environmental degradation proceeds at rates that suggest supernatural acceleration of natural processes. Climate patterns show signs of manipulation designed to create conditions of global crisis. The child's influence may be actively hastening environmental collapse to create desperation that makes humanity receptive to alternative spiritual authorities. Every major global system now contains elements that would serve the child's agenda if it achieved freedom. Communication networks enable instant global influence. Educational systems promote moral relativism, and entertainment culture celebrates the inversion of traditional values. Humanity is being prepared for a revelation that will challenge every spiritual assumption. Recent satellite imagery of the sealed monastery location shows increasing reality distortion around the containment site. The supernatural barriers established in 1348 show signs of degradation after nearly 7 centuries. Vatican experts estimate that complete containment failure could occur within the next generation, releasing something that has grown immeasurably more powerful through centuries of patient influence. In 2012, Vatican archivists discovered that documents in the Archivum Secretum Diabolicum were spontaneously rewriting themselves. digital scanners malfunctioned when attempting to photograph the text, producing images that showed different content than what human eyes could see. The child's influence had begun affecting even the sealed records of its own containment. Satellite imagery from multiple space agencies reveals gravitational anomalies around the monastery location that violate known physics. The area appears different on every scan, as if reality itself cannot maintain consistency near the containment site. NASA classified these findings as existential threats to human understanding of physical law. Since 2015, Internet users worldwide report receiving messages that appear without being sent, text appearing in documents they're writing, emails arriving from addresses that don't exist, and social media posts that promote the child's philosophy, appearing on accounts that never created them. The influence has achieved direct access to global digital consciousness. In 2018, Pope Francis convened the first emergency session specifically addressing the monastery situation since 1348. The meeting included cardinals, quantum physicists, and experts in supernatural phenomena. The Pope's opening statement was classified, but leaked portions suggest he declared humanity faced an existential crisis requiring measures beyond traditional church authority. The Vatican commissioned a joint operation combining 21st century technology with 14th century ritual knowledge. Particle accelerators were used to generate divine frequencies, while priests performed ceremonies using fragments of the original holy relics. Every attempt not only failed, but seemed to accelerate the containment degradation. Research reveals that supernatural phenomena worldwide are quantum entangled with events at the monastery location. When reality distorts in Bavaria, corresponding effects manifest simultaneously in locations across 6 continents. The child has achieved influence that operates outside normal space-time constraints. Children born since 2020 increasingly display characteristics matching historical accounts of the monastery child. They speak fluent Latin without instruction, demonstrate knowledge of theology that surpasses seminary graduates, and age at rates suggesting supernatural acceleration. These children refer to themselves as preparing the way. Religious leaders across all faiths report receiving divine inspiration that consistently promotes moral relativism and challenges traditional authority. Christian pastors, Islamic imams, Jewish rabbis, and Buddhist monks independently develop similar teachings that align with the child's corrupted theology. Interfaith dialogue increasingly serves the influence agenda. The world's leading physicists studying the monastery phenomena report that their findings challenge fundamental assumptions about reality. Quantum mechanics appears to be merely a shallow layer covering deeper forces that operate according to theological rather than physical principles. Science itself may be insufficient to comprehend the threat. Classified documents reveal that NATO has established a supernatural monitoring division specifically focused on the monastery situation. The threat level has been classified as extinction-level event, not just for Christianity, but for human civilization as currently understood. Military solutions have been ruled out as potentially catastrophic. Time distortion around the monastery location appears to be accelerating historical processes toward a predetermined conclusion. Events that would normally take decades are occurring in months. The child's influence on global development is no longer subtle. It's rapidly preparing humanity for something unprecedented. Global markets increasingly respond to forces that economists cannot explain through traditional analysis. Economic decisions worldwide serve a pattern that becomes clear only when viewed through the lens of the child's theological agenda. The global economy is being restructured to facilitate a transition that most participants don't consciously understand. Independent cultures worldwide are converging on ideas that align with the child's corrupted theology. This convergence occurs without cultural exchange, suggesting supernatural coordination of human ideological development. Humanity is being prepared to accept concepts that would have been universally rejected in previous centuries, analysis reveals that every prophecy made by the child in 1348 is being fulfilled simultaneously in the modern era. The 7 kingdoms and 7 popes predictions are complete. The age of darkness is beginning, and the voluntary embrace of truth is occurring globally. The child's patience is being rewarded with perfect fulfillment. Vatican monitoring systems indicate that complete containment failure will occur within the next 5 to 7 years. When the barriers collapse, something that has grown immeasurably more powerful through 7 centuries of patient influence will be released into a world that has been perfectly prepared to receive it. Humanity approaches a choice that was prophesied 7 centuries ago: to embrace truth regardless of its cost, or to maintain comforting illusions that can no longer be sustained. The child's influence has prepared global civilization for this moment, when humanity must decide whether to accept a reality that transcends traditional moral and spiritual categories. The monastery child poses the ultimate theological question: is absolute truth worth pursuing regardless of its cost to human comfort and traditional beliefs? 7 centuries of influence suggest that this entity offers authentic spiritual revelation, but at the price of everything humanity has believed about moral order. The doors that have contained ultimate truth for 7 centuries are beginning to open. What emerges will offer humanity a choice between comfortable illusion and terrifying authenticity. The child that was born from perfect innocence has become something that transcends human categories of good and evil. The question is not whether we can stop what's coming, but whether we're prepared to discover what truth really means when every assumption about reality has been carefully, patiently proven wrong.